Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Mem Hey. We because I had a dentist appointment yesterday, we ended up finishing in the middle of Mem Dalet and Mebet, and so we'll pick up from there. Let me share my screen and we'll really get started. So the we're in the 6th chapter of Sanhedrin. We are reviewing at the moment the procedures post-conviction before execution. So we've been going through, first we had the procedures of litigation generally, who argued first and all of those details, and what was asked of the witnesses and and so on. And now the convict has been convicted, and so and he's been convicted of a penalty for which he is going to be punished with skila, stoning. And the question is sort of like what has to happen. And one of the steps was that when they got within 10 amot of the Beit HaSkila, the location where the stoning is going to happen, they tell the convict who's been convicted that they should confess. And they use one of the examples of confession in Tanakh is from the story of Achan. Achan, after the fall of the walls of Jericho, Yoshua says to the Jewish people, don't take anything from the city. Well, Achan didn't listen. He took something. And then as a result of that, 36 or 1, depending on your approach, soldier died in the battle to take over Ai, the city of Ai. And Yoshua was shocked. We had not lost a single soldier to that point. And so in the conversation that ensues between him and Hashem afterwards, Hashem indicates that somebody who's Jewish did something wrong, and it ends up being that they run lots, and it all falls on Achan, and Achan is taken out to be killed, and on the way he is given the opportunity to confess. There's a little bit of trickery we saw. Then maybe the confession was thought that if he confessed, he wouldn't be executed. In any event, he confesses and he's executed. And now we're going to talk about the impact of that confession. The Mishnah noted that Achan's confession brought atonement. And so the Gemara is now going to cite a similar brisa. We're at the 2 dots in the middle of Mem Daled Amabet. So Minayin Shekiper Lo Vidui. How do we know? This was the question that was asked in the Mishnah, that the confession brought atonement. And the Mishnah cited Psukim, but we're going to now cite a brisa that says something similar. Tanarban, Minayin Shekiper Lo Vidui. How do we know that the confession worked? Shenemar Vayomer Yoshua Me Achartanu Ya'akarcha Hashem Bayom Hazeh. And Hashem said to Achan, why have you ruined us? God shall ruin you this day. So the point is that Hayom hazeh atachor, today you're ruined. V'iyatachor la'olam haba, but you're not ruined for the world to come. Uksiv uvnei zerach zimri ve'esan ve'heman ve'chalkol v'dara kulam chamisha. That when it refers in Divrei Hayamim to the children of Zerach, who include Achan, although he's not called Achan there. He was called Zimri there. Rashi tells us that Zimri. There's Rashi on both sides of the daf on Mem Daled Amabet. So on the right hand side, about where the 2 dots are that we started today, there's a Rashi that says Zimri, and it says Hu Achan Ken Mefarish Lekameh, as we're going to see shortly that Zimri is Achan v'Kolu HaKatuv Im Sharachav, and he was included with the rest of his brothers, Shahayu Tzadikim, who were all righteous. So my Kulam Chamisha, Kulan Chamisha, Hein La'olam Haba, that when it comes to deserving their reward in the world to come, they were all deserving, even Zimri. And Ksiv Zimri, Uksiv Achan. Second, why is his name is one place is Zimri, and the other place it's Achan. So how do we understand that? So Rav and Shmuel have a discussion about it. Chad Amar Achan Shmo. One says that Achan was really his name. Vilama Nikra Shmo Zimri. And why was he also called Zimri? Sha'asa Masa Zimri. Because he acted in the way that Zimri did. Remember, Zimri was the one who was killed by Pinchas with the spear when he was engaged in an immoral and improper act with Cosby. And so V'chad Amar Zimri Shmo, and one says that actually no, his real name was Zimri. V'lama Nikra Shmo Achan. Why was he also called Achan? She'ikin she'avonoseyan shel Yisrael, because he was like the way a snake curls around something. That's how he did what he did around Israel, and so as a result, he caught Israel up in his sin, is essentially what is why his name was Achan. Okay, so that brings us to the next. The Mishnah noted a debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis as to whether we would instruct the convict to confess for all sins other than this one if he knows he was wrongly convicted. But the Gemara asks on the rabbis. So im eno yodea lehisvadot, Rabbi Yehuda omer l'chulu l'nakot atzman. So allowing him to clear himself. V'yinaku atzman. So 1 second, why not? Why do the rabbis say you can't, let him clear himself, right? So, because that's what the rabbis responded, like, he's going to try and clear himself. What's wrong with that? Because we're worried that if we allow the convict to sort of say as the last, if we encourage him to say, as a last statement that he is in fact innocent of this sin, then it will cause cast aspersions on the court and the witnesses. Now, we are going to have an example where that is exactly what happened, and this is a remarkable case. You can see why is there Rashi on both sides of the daf? Because there is a tremendous Rashi on the left-hand side of Mem Daled Amabet. It goes from the second line, the end of the second line, all the way to the bottom. Now, I would love to go through this Rashi with you, but we're a little bit behind because of yesterday. I'm going to give the general gist of the story outside, and we'll hopefully at the end, if we have time, we'll come back to it. But let's get there and we'll see. So Tana Rabbanan, Masib Adam Echad Shiyatzag Lahareg. There's a person who's getting taken out to be killed. Amar, he said, if I actually did the sin that you're about to kill me for, then I don't want this death penalty to atone for any of my sins. But if I didn't actually do this sin, then I want this death penalty to atone for all of my sins. And I will hold Israel, all of Israel, and this court completely blameless. They are not in any way responsible for my death. However, but the witnesses who have convicted me of a crime that I did not commit, they should never find forgiveness. And when the rabbis heard this, they said, Amru, we can't get this guy back. We can't undo the death penalty. Shekvar nigzag zera, because the decree has already been decreed. Ella yehareg, so that he has to be executed. And unfortunately, there's going to be a bad words spoken about these witnesses. Pshita. So this was all a brisa. What is this brisa? Seems obvious, the Gemara asks. So kol kamine, do we allow, is that actually in his power? Meaning, do we allow a defendant to say some kind of broad statement like this and thereby be exempt from the death penalty? Of course not. Then if we allowed that, what would everybody would do it? Exactly. So lo tzricha de kahadri behusadi. No, the witnesses themselves retracted as a result of this statement.
Another story. Right?
And so now the witnesses said that we were lying, but my havi, Well, who cares if the witness is retracted? Because we have a principle, kevan shehigid shuv eino chozer umagid. Once you've testified, your testimony has been validated, you can't do anything to retract it. You got to be very careful. This is one of the things that I loved about when we learned Maseches Nedarim, that our words have tremendous meaning. Impact. You can't, there are some things that if you say, you can't take back. This is such an important principle because everybody's saying, with no offense, but, that is not a good way to act. We all do it. I admit that I do it. So, but we got to stop that. If you think that you're going to be offensive, so then don't say it. Don't start, because there's no way you could take back words that you said. And this is just highlighting that. You cannot alter your testimony post facto. So lo tzricha de afal gav de koyave taima lemilsayu. So the Gemara explains, no, the witnesses explained why they lied, and yet we didn't give them a chance. And it's like the case of Baya the tax collector. So what was that case? So in brief, two people, Baya, this awful tax collector, and a tzaddik die on the same day. They're going to be buried, and bandits come and start attacking them. And again, I'm phrasing it maybe not quite exactly as Rashi phrased, but you'll get the general gist. And we'll do the Rashi if we have time at the end, because it's an awesome Rashi. So everybody runs away except for one student of the great rabbi who died. And so and then everybody comes back after the scare is over, and they switch the bodies. They bury the tzaddik in the lowly grave that's given for the tax collector because everybody hates him, and he's an awful person, and they give the tax collector an honorific burial in a wonderful prime location, and the student is distraught. He tries to make the argument, and nobody believes him. So goes to sleep that night, and his Rebbe comes to him in a dream, and he says, don't worry about it. I'm where I'm supposed to be. He's where he's supposed to be. Everybody's great. And he says, so he shows him that he's in heaven, and the other guy's not in a good place. And the guy's like, well, how long is this guy going to be there for? Well, he's going to be there until Shimon ben Shetach takes his place. Shimon ben Shetach, he's like a righteous guy. What did he do? Well, he didn't deal with the witches that are in Ashkelon. And so what does the student do? As soon as he wakes up the next morning, he goes over to Shimon ben Shetach and say, listen, you got to go deal with the witches in Ashkelon. So what does Shimon ben Shetach do? It's a rainy day. He takes cloaks, he puts them in a pot, and for him and for 80 other men. And he goes and he knocks on the door where the witches are hiding. And he says, listen, I'm a wizard. I'm going to make 80 men appear, and they're going to dance with you, and you're going to, and everything will be wonderful. And you'll see I can walk between the raindrops because I'm wearing a dry cloak, because the cloak was in the pot until he got up there. And so as a result, all the 80 men come in, they pick up the witches, and because they're no longer touching the ground, Rashi says that they aren't able to do their magic, and they whisk them off and they execute them. But two of the survivors of the witches' descendants, are really upset about it. All these witches, all their family, etc., friends were killed. So they come and they testify against Shimon ben Shetach's son, a false testimony, but they testify against him, and he's convicted. And he's about to be executed, and he says this exact same thing that we say here, that if this is actually for me, that I did this, then no atonement. But if I didn't do this, everybody should be atoned except for the two descendants of the witches. And those witches then say, you know what, you're absolutely right. And we did it because his father, convicted all of our mothers. And so as a result, nonetheless, Shimon ben Shetach's son is killed. And there's nothing that we can do about it. So that is the story. Hopefully, again, we'll have a chance to go through it in detail. By the way, if it sounds familiar, I have it now on the screen. There's a children's book that came out in 1976 when I was a child, and I love this story. It was The Rabbi and the 29 Witches by Marilyn Hirsch, and this is based on that story and the Gemara in Yerushalmi and Chagiga Bet Bet. And so that is something that I needed to share. So, all right. So that was
Just
a brief.
briefly, that's an issue in secular criminal law in the United States about not reopening cases after they've done, which has caused a lot of problems because often things like DNA evidence become available.
That's correct.
The most
Absolutely.
famous case in New York recently was probably the Central Park Five.
Correct, exactly. And so you're absolutely right. But I will note that there's a very big difference between recanting testimony and new evidence. Those are not necessarily the same thing. But one can understand why we would not allow recanted testimony, but we would allow new evidence. So
Yeah, there was a case in Virginia about 15 years ago with recanted testimony in a death penalty case.
yeah, did they end up killing the person, or did they actually let the person go?
It took
You remember?
clemency from the only recourse was clemency from the governor.
There you go. So
No
that
way to
that
reopen the
it,
case.
and it basically it highlights the fact that
Yeah.
when unless it's hard to know, because were you lying then or were you lying now? All right. What happens one more step before the actual stoning? Haya rachok mi beis haskila arba amos, when they get within 4 amos of the place of the stoning. Mafshitin oso es begadav. They take off his clothing. Haish mechasav mechasin oso milfanav. For men, they will cover the front. Va'isha milafaneha umeachareha divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that women get covered in the back and the front. The Chachamim omrim ha'ish niskal arom. The man is stoned unclothed. Va'isha ve'ein ha'isha niskalas aruma. But a woman is not stoned unclothed. So the question is what exactly is this debate about? Is this a debate about the respect that we give to a human body? Is it about we are concerned about improper thinking in connection with a woman being undressed? So let's take a look. That's what the Gemara is going to discuss. We turn to Mem Hayam and Aleph. Tana Rabbanan Ha'ish mechasin oso perak echad milfanab. We use one piece of cloth in the front. We use two, because that entire bottom part of the woman's body is considered her nakedness, and divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said, just like in our Mishnah. Note, that only happens to the man. It doesn't happen to the woman because we don't undress her. My time, what's the reasoning of the rabbis? Amar Krav v'ragamu oso, that we stone him, and we saw this the other day, that oso indicates directly on him, not on his clothing. So my oso, ilema oso v'lo osa, maybe you might think that it means him and not her. Of course it can't mean that, meaning that we would never kill a woman. Because the Torah specifically says in Dvarim Parak Yud Zayin Pasuk Hey that we will kill a man or a woman. Elamayoso, what does it mean by him? Oso below ksuso, it means directly on him without his clothing. Ha osa b'chususa, but maybe with her she will wear clothing. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, oso below ksuso. No, we kill him without his clothing. We kill him without any clothing, and the oso lo shna ish lo shna isha, doesn't make a difference whether it's a man or a woman. We treat men and women equally with respect to the death penalty, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Lamemra de Rabbanan Chaishi Leherhura, are you telling me that the rabbis are concerned about the evil thoughts, the bad thoughts that a man would have in seeing the naked woman? The Rabbi Yehuda lo Chaish Leherhura, and Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about that. But we actually have another Mishnah that seems to take the exact opposite perspective. Because we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Sota, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, HaKohen Ochas B'Vagadeha, that the Kohen takes her clothing, Im Nikru, in grabbing her clothing, if they tear, Nikru, they tear, V'im Niframu, and if they tatter or they shred, Niframu, then they get shredded. Adsha Migala Esliba, until they uncover her heart, namely, which includes her breasts. The Soser Es Ara, and they untie her hair. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda. So that was the Tanakhama's perspective, suggesting that the rabbis are okay with her nakedness showing. But Rabbi Yehuda says, Im haya liba na'eh, if she was attractive, if her heart was attractive, lo haya megalehu, they wouldn't uncover it. Meaning if her chest was attractive. Im haya sa'ara na'eh, and if her hair was attractive, lo haya sosro, they wouldn't untie it. So here we see, so that both, it seems like the rabbis are inconsistent, because here the rabbis are concerned about her being undressed, and there they're not. And here Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned about her being undressed, and over there by Sota he is. So Amarabba Hasam Hainu time. And here's the reasoning for Rabbi Yehuda over there. Shema Tete mi din zakah. When it comes to the woman in Sota, she may not have done it, and so as a result, she may leave this court alive. And if she does, v'yisgaru ba pirchei kahuna, well, the youthful Kohanim will have been attracted to her, and v'hacha hamakatla. I'm sorry, and as a result, they may actually take action. But hacha hamakatla. But here, the woman's executed. There's no opportunity to do anything with her. But and you'll say, well, maybe the attraction that the arousal she will have caused will cause them to do something wrong with somebody else. No, Amarabba, Gamire Ain, Yetzer Hara, Sholet Elabamisha Ain of Roos. No, the power of the Yetzer Hara is only in connection with somebody that you could actually see. Meaning that if you no longer have the opportunity to be with that person because they've been killed, well, then you're not going to do anything about it. So Amarava, the Rabbi Yehuda Kasha. 1 second. The Rabbanan Lo Kasha. 1 second. You've explained why it's not a problem according to Rabbi Yehuda. But because you've addressed that problem, but are you saying that there's no problem with respect to the rabbis? Ela Amarava, Rava explains, yes, actually, there's a problem with the Rava also, for the rabbis also, and so as a result, our answer is not complete. The Rabbi Yehuda Lo Kasha Kedeshanin. So as we just answered, so that's the answer we can give for Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan Nami Lo Kasha. But how about the rabbis? Why over here in stoning do we say that they don't uncover the woman, but over there they do? So Amrakra, the Nivasuru Kol Hanashim below Saseno Kizmach Techena, that we have a principle that all women should be chastised and no one will act similarly. So that's a pasuk in Yechezkel, and that chapter in Yechezkel is dealing with the Jewish people by analogy as the wife of Hashem, and we are acting immorally and having an affair essentially, and Hashem is going, and the point is that the way Hashem treats us is a warning to all women not to act improperly with their husband. So hacha ein lecha yisur gadol mizeh, and here in the context of the Sota, this becoming naked because she was in solitude with a man who was not her husband is a great way to ensure that no women are going to follow her example. So 1 second. So, and we don't have to do that. We're not worried about that in connection with the death penalty. But the Gemara asks, so why not do both? Why not do both the death penalty and her being naked, and that will scare people even more against doing something that will be subject to the death penalty? So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Ravua, Amar Krav Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, that the principle of love your neighbor as yourself tells us that barur lo misa yafa, you need to choose for them a nice death, meaning that we are not that even though we are engaging in execution, we have to remember that this is still a person in front of us, and we need to have the right thoughts, and we need to make it as painless as possible, and do it in a way that is as least embarrassing as possible. So Lema de Rav Nachman Tanaihi. So maybe Rav Nachman's statement about whether or not we engage in V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha is really what the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing about, and that Rabbi Yehuda says we don't care about that principle, and therefore we allow the woman to be naked, and the rabbis say no, we do. So no, lo dekuli alma islahu the Rav Nachman. Everybody agrees with Rav Nachman. And what they're arguing about, what Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim are actually arguing about, Mar Savar Bizyone de Inish Adifale Tfei Minyacha de Gufe, that according to the rabbis, people are more worried about their being degraded in a humiliating fashion than they are about being killed quickly. And according to Umar Sabar and Rabbi Yehuda says, Niyacha de Gufe Adiv Mibizyone. No, it's better to be killed quickly than to not be embarrassed. Because what's the principle here? The concern is that if the person's wearing clothing, and I think about my down winter coat here, if the person's wearing clothing, then when they stone him, the clothing will provide some level of protection. Now, it's not going to be much protection to a humongous rock, but it will be some level of protection, and that will cause him to have more suffering. And so Rabbi Yehuda, who says, I'm not going to worry about the embarrassment factor because at the end of the day, the person wants to be killed quickly. So we're going to focus on no clothing. And the rabbis say, no, I'm worried about the person is usually going to be more worried about their own embarrassment than being killed quickly. So let the woman still wear clothing, and she won't be as embarrassed. And even if it takes a few extra seconds for her to die. Okay, so now we get to the actual stoning execution. So, and that's the next Mishnah. The Mishnah is middle, towards the bottom of Memhei Amud Aleph. Beis Haskila Hayagova Shtei Komos. The Beis Haskila, the house where they would engage in this skila, they would set it up so that it was 2 stories high or 2 levels high. What is exactly a koma? It seems like koma is likely the height of a person. So it would be twice the height of a person. Echad min ha'edim dochafo al masnav. And one of the witnesses will push him on his hip, from his hip, meaning use the pit, push him sideways to fall down. Nepach al libo, if he falls on his chest, so that meaning that he falls face forward. So then hovcho al masnav, if he's still alive, this is talking about, then they'll turn him on his side. Now, the Rashi tells us that keshehu mushkab prakdan, if he was also on his back, hu meguna yoter, that would be even worse. So as a result, basically we always are going to try and flip the guy on his side so that the stoning can happen sort of towards, at least on some aspect of his front chest. And so as a result, that's what he's going to do, because the meisba yatsa. But if he dies as a result of the fall, that's going to be sufficient for the punishment, and the court will have fulfilled its obligation. V'im lav hasheni notel. V'im lav, if the person didn't die, hasheni notel as ha'evan v'nos no alibo. A person will take the second stone and put it on his heart. Now, of course, the guy's up at the top, so it's not doesn't mean putting, but rather he's going to take the stone and toss it onto the person. V'im lav, and if imespa yatsa, if he dies as a result of that stoning, great, the court has fulfilled its obligation. V'im lav rigimaso b'chol Yisrael. Then, if not, everyone in Israel stones the guy. Shneamar yad ha'edim tiyabo barishona. This is a way to fulfill that the hands of the witnesses will be the first step. Lahamito, to kill him. V'yad ha'kol ha'am ba'achrona, and then the rest of the nation will follow. And this pasuk is in Dvarim, Perek Yud Zayin, pasuk Zayin. So the Gemara wonders, Tana, the komishalo, you also have, you end up with 3 heights, because you have the guy standing, and we're going to push him with his, push him from his hips. And so his head is essentially 3 people's height above the ground. And so, umi be'inan kuli high, do we really need to toss the guy up from such a high location? Uraminu, I'll show you that it's not necessary, because when we had pits, when we talked about pits in Bava Kama, what did we say? We said Ma bor shehu kidei lahamis asara tvachim. What is a pit that's deep enough to cause somebody's death? 10 tvachim. So kol kidei lahamis asara. So to every type of other kind of depth can bring about death if it's 10 tvachim deep. So shouldn't 10 tvachim be enough? So that's well more than that's going to be more than 2 amot. So Amar Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, Amar Kra, va'ahavta l'recha kamocha. No, the principle that we saw just 2 minutes ago about why we're going to try and choose the most nicest way to death, similarly here, brolo misa yafa, choose the nice death. And we want the person to die, and we're worried that if it's too low, the person won't die. Well, ihaki ligbe tfei. Well, if that's true, bring him to the top of a big tower. No, mishum deminavel. No, the problem is that if you bring him to the top of a big tower and then he falls off, and yeah, he'll surely die, but it won't be a pretty death. Yeah. It will be disgusting, and we don't want that either. So echad mina edim dochafo. So the Mishnah said that one of the witnesses will push him. Tanu rabbanan minaya shebedechia. How do we know that it's pushing? Because when it's said in the connection with the death penalty of skila, if somebody were to go up Har Sinai, it says Talmud Lomer Yaro, you should throw down. Muminayan shebeskila. How do we know that also you do skila? Talmud Lomer Sakol. So Muminayan shebeskila ubedechia. How do I know that you got to do both? Talmud Lomer Sakol Yisakel. Oh Yaro Yara. The double language shows that you need to do both. How do I know that if you just did the pushing, that would be sufficient, and you don't also have to throw a stone? Because of the or, it separates it so that it should be sufficient with the hurling. So, how do I know that it's got to be not just that statement, which was by Har Sinai, also applies in the future? Talmud Lomar, as we turn to Memheyam and Bet, Sako Yisakel, you should, he should surely be stoned. So the point is the surely stoning suggests even into the future. So, and we said in our Mishnah, V'im Lav, Eid Hasheni Notel Esa Eben, we said, I'm sorry for not scrolling, we said that the second witness will now pick up the stone and say, second, hold on, scroll a little bit more, see where I get up to. So now we say the second witness is going to pick up the stone and throw it on to the person. Notel, he's going to do it on his own. He's going to take it. V'hatanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Eben Haisasham. There was a stone at the place where they would kill the guy. Masoi Shnei V'nei Adam. And it was a load that required 2 men. Notla, he would take it, the notna alibo, and then he would put it on the chest of the convict. Imes ba yatsa. And if that causes the person to die, then everyone has fulfilled their obligations. But second, so we just cited this brisa because it took 2 men to pick up. But according to your reasoning, this brisa itself is a problem because masoi shnei v'nei adam. You said that it was a load that requires 2 people, but then you said notla. He took it, v'notna alibo, and he put it on the chest. So how could that be? How do we have something that weighs the amount that 2 people need to lift it, and yet 1 person is putting it? So no, the point is that the witness picks it up with somebody else. But then when it comes to pushing it to get it to have it throw down on the deceased, on the convict, so he's going to push it himself, and that way it will come down with greater force. Meaning the point is that 1 person does the pushing, and that way we know that all the pushing happens at one time, and we don't have somebody else accidentally working against him. Okay, v'im lav rigimaso, and if the guy survives the big stone, then everybody else is going to stone him. But v'hatanya me'olam lo shana ba adam, that they never had to repeat, meaning they never had to throw a second stone. So Mika Amar to Avid? No, you're right. They never had to throw a second stone. We didn't say in our Mishnah that they actually did this. De'i mitzra kamina. We were just saying that if it was ever necessary, it turned out that it was never necessary because this first big stone would always kill the guy if the guy survived the fall. Amar Mar Evan Haisa. 1 second. You said that the stone was there waiting for the person to be killed, suggesting that we would use the same stone over and over. Vahatanya, but we have the following brisa: Achas Evan Sheniskapa, whether it's the stone that he was stoned with, Va'achat Eitz Shenitla Alav, or the tree that he was hung from, Ve'echad Sayev Shenaragbo, or the sword that he was with which he was beheaded, Ve'echad Sudar Shenechanakbo, or the scarf with which he was strangled, Kulan Nikbaranimo, all of them are buried with him. So this suggests that this stone would be buried with the guy. So how could it have been there waiting? So lo tzricha demitakne umaisi achrine chilufayu. No, really, it would be buried with him, and they would bring another. The point being that any time that they would bury the convict with the stone, they would be sure to bring a new stone, so we would be ready for the next convict. So Nick 1 second. Nick Barinimo, 1 second. You said that he was buried with it. Vahatanya a Nick Barinimo. We also have a brisa that says that he was not, that stone was not buried with him. So how do we reconcile these two brisas? Amara Papa, my imo. What does it mean by imo? Imo betfisa so. It means within his reach. And Rashi explains, betoch arba amos avalo nikvaru imo mamish. It wasn't be literally in the same grave, but rather it would be close by him, meaning that we're going to bury this thing that actually killed the guy. Amar Shmuel, nikta'a yad ha'edim pater. What happens if after the person is convicted, the witnesses lose, God forbid, their hands? Because now Shmuel says that, you know what? The convict goes free. He does not get killed. My time, what's the reason? Debeina yada edim tiyebo berishona veleka. As we cited this pasuk in our Mishnah, the hands of the witnesses have to be the first thing that work against the convict. And here the person doesn't have hands, and so as a result, he's not able to do it. Elamiyata edim gidmin demiikara hachi nami dipsile. Well, 1 second. Does that mean that if, God forbid, a person has no hands and sees a murder, he's not able to testify because now he won't be able to convict the guy? No, that's not the case. Shiny Hussam, that case is different. To Amarkra Yad Ha'edim. It's got to be the hands of the witnesses, meaning they have to have had hands at the time that they were witnesses. Shahaisa kvar, that they had hands when they testified, and it's only now that they don't have the hands. Then we won't be able to fulfill the pasuk. But if, in fact, they never had hands even when they testified, well, then there's no difference between before and now, and we will allow them to complete their execution. Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. So now we're going to challenge Shmuel's ruling several times. And then we'll actually end up trying to support Shmuel's ruling. We'll say that actually Shmuel's ruling is subject to a machlokes tanaim. And that really what this is about is, do we have to read the Torah literally? Does when we say that you have to do something, is there a literal, is the literal read important? And we'll see that there's a machlokus about that. So let's take a look. Meisvei kol makom sheyuduhu shnayim v'yomru meidim anu beish ploni shenigbar dino bebeis din ploni uploni edav hareze yareg. 1 second. How can you say that the witnesses must be the ones who toss the guy off the height and throw the first stone when we say in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Makos, Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, that in fact, if two witnesses come and testify that John Doe was convicted in another court and witness A and witness B were the witnesses in that case, that we will actually go out and kill John Doe. Meaning and by implication, A and B aren't in our courtroom and aren't going to be able to do the first pushing. And so how can we engage in that execution in that situation? So Tirgama Shmuel behen hein edim. No, The situation is where A and B are testifying in the second court. And and the point is that John Doe ran away. And so as a result, now they go to a different court and they say, we testified in the other court and they convicted him. And so in that situation, the person will be killed, and these witnesses will be able to carry out the principle of being the Yad Ha'edim Tiyeh Bo Barishonah. Okay, so that was question number one, and we've resolved it. Question number two. Umi be'inan kra diksiv. Do we have to really fulfill every verse as it's written? Tanya mos yumas hamakerot, that when it comes to somebody who commits murder, the person who struck the guy is going to surely be put to death, and because he's a murderer. I might have thought that the only thing you could do is the Misa, is the death penalty that the person is specifically supposed to get as a murderer, namely the beheading, which is done with a sword. How do I know that even if you can't use that death penalty, that you still have to kill him? Let's say you don't have any swords around. So, and then you should still kill him with any kind of killing you're able to. Talmud Lomar, Mos Yumas Hamakeh, he shall surely be put to death. Mikol Makom. That suggests that he's required to be put to death in any way possible. So how can we have, on the one hand, the principle of you have to fulfill the specific requirements of the specific death penalty, and yet when it comes to a murderer, we say that you don't have to fulfill the specific requirements of the death penalty? Doesn't that show that Shmuel's wrong? No, it doesn't show that Shmuel's wrong. Shiny Hussam, that case is different to Amar Krab Mos Yumas, because it's the Torah there specifically says you should be put to death. So it's the extra wording that says that in that situation, we won't necessarily follow the words of the Torah. The Ligmar Mineh, well, why not learn from that case to the Torah, to the rest of the Torah generally, and specifically to every other kind of death penalty, to tell us that even if you can't put the person to death in the proper procedures, you should use whatever method is necessary in order to fulfill that requirement of execution. No, because in that same pasuk that says the requirement that we're going to kill the murderer, however, no matter what, and even if we can't use the proper method, we're going to use any method. In that same pasuk, it also talks about the family of somebody who killed someone who was killed accidentally. So if somebody goes and kills somebody accidentally, they need to run to a sanctuary city, and in that sanctuary city, they're protected. But if they leave that sanctuary city before the Kohen Gadol dies, well, then the family of the person who was killed accidentally will be able to avenge that death and kill the quote-unquote murderer, kill the person who killed somebody accidentally. And so in that law also, there is an aspect there. We don't fulfill exactly what we say in the Torah. And when we have two rules that are taught together, and they teach the same principle, then you cannot generalize from them. So when you have one rule then we can generalize from it. But when you have two different rules that are taught at the same time, that are taught at the same rule that are taught for two cases at the same time, then we will not generalize it more broadly. And so Rotseach had Amran. The case of the murder is the one that we said before, that we're going to execute the guy even if we have to use the wrong method. Goel Hadam Maihi, what is the situation of the avenger of blood, the person who was related to the person who was killed accidentally? What's the situation where that's the case? Titania, we have the following brisa. Goel Hadam Yamis Es Hazarutzeach, that the pasuk says, and it's the same pasuk that we cited before, Lamed Hey pasuk Kaf Aleph in Bamidbar, yes, in Bamidbar. And so the pasuk says the avenger of the blood will kill the murderer. Mitzvah begoel adam. This shows that it's an obligation for the avenger of the blood to kill the guy if in fact he goes out of the sanctuary city. Uminayan she'im ein lo goel shebastin ma'amidin lo goel. How do I know that what happens if the person has no relatives who was killed accidentally? Are we supposed to just let this the person not have to go to a sanctuary city? No. The Basin will appoint someone to fulfill the role of the blood avenger. And as a result, that will help encourage the person to go to the sanctuary city. Shene'emar b'figo bo, that it says when he encounters him, he implying mikol makom, that it doesn't have to necessarily be a related avenger. It could be any avenger. So the point is that even a court-appointed avenger is able to be the avenger. And so the bottom line is that we have here too the concept that we're not fulfilling the exact wording of the Torah. The exact wording of the Torah seems to imply that only the relative is able to avenge the death of somebody who was killed by accident. If the person who committed the murder, quote unquote, the accidental murder, is not in the sanctuary city, but we see from the pasuk, we learn from the pasuk that also will appoint somebody else, and that is okay too, even though it doesn't fulfill quite the wording of the pasuk. So therefore, we're not going to learn this principle out everywhere else. So Amr Leimar Kashisha Bray the Rav Chasida Rechista the Rav Ashi Umi Lo Beinan Krag Hidiksiv. 1 second. Are you telling me that we don't need to fulfill a verse as is written? Meaning, how isn't really Shmuel correct? Because listen to the following Mishnah. V'hatnan. If one of the parents of and Rashi tells us that we're dealing with a ben sorer umora, a wayward son who is a rebellious son. If one of the parents was missing a hand, o lame, or he was mute, o chiger, or he was lame, o suma, or deaf, o cherish, or mute. I'm sorry, o suma, or blind, or cherish, or deaf and mute. Eno nasa ben sora mora. Well, then we will not make the child a rebellious son. Shenemar v'tafsubo, because it says that the father and mother need to grab him. V'lo gidmin. Well, that means that they can't be missing hands, because if you don't have hands, you can't grab. V'hotziu also, and they need it taken out. Lo chigrin. So if you're lame and you're unable to walk, well, then you can't take out. V'amru, and they say lo yomin. So that shows that they can't be mute. B'neinu zeh, this child, v'lo sumin. They can't be blind because they specifically refer to this particular child. They have to be able to point, and you can't point if you can't see. Einenu shomeach b'kolenu, and he doesn't hear our voice. V'lo chershin, and that shows that they can't be deaf, because the only way you know that the person is not listening is when they respond, "I'm not listening."
Yeah.
So my timer. So what's the reason? La mishum to be krad k'diksiv. Isn't the reasoning of this Mishnah based on the principle that everything in the Torah has to be fulfilled exactly as it's written? No, not necessarily. Lo shiny hasam dekule kra yiserahu. That entire pasuk is extra. We didn't need to have all those details in that pasuk, and so as a result, we would have figured it out on our own. And by repeating it, that's why it shows that it's absolutely necessary. So one last effort to prove that Shmuel is correct, and in the end, again, we'll see that it's a machlokas. So Tashma ein la rechov. There's if this is a brisa that is talking about a ir hanidachat, a city that engaged in idol worship that is going to be destroyed. And so if there's no, and the Torah says that you need to bring all the possessions into the public square and burn them all, of all the people in the city. And you're going to kill all the people in the city as well. But the bottom line is all their things need to be destroyed. So ein la rachov, if there is no public square, ein nases ir hanidachas, then it can't become an ir hanidachat. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's what Rabbi Yishmael says. Rabbi Kiva Omer, ein la rachov, osen la rachov. If there is no public square, well, then you make one. So ad kan lo pligi ela demar savar rechova demi ikara beina umar savar rechova dehashda nami kedemi ikara dami. So it seems clear that what are they arguing about is Rabbi Yishmael says you have to have one at the time that they are convicted, that they have to have one at the time that they engaged in the improper behavior. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, you can make it now. The point isn't that they had a public square when they engaged in the idol worship. The point is that it's sufficient to have had the public square now that you're going to destroy the city. But what it seems like about the Kuli Alma Be'in and Krad Ksiv, but everybody agrees you need to enforce the Torah the way it's written. No, Tanaihi. Actually, Shmuel's principle about whether or not we have to enforce it is a machlokas Tanaim, Tanan, because we have the following Mishnah in connection with the Mitzorah. This is a Mishnah in Negayim, a Perak Yudalad, Mishnah Tet. Ein lo bohen yad, if the Mitzorah does not have a thumb, bohen regel, or a big toe, ozen, or an ear, yimanit, in all cases the right one, then ein lo tahara olamit. That the Tanakama says there is no possibility for achieving atonement, because part of the process of atonement is to put the blood of the bird sacrifice that is done for a Mitzorah on his his right hand thumb, his right hand big toe, and his right ear. Rabbi Eliezer says no. No sin al makom of no, it's sufficient to put it on the place. We don't have to fulfill exactly the Torah as it's written. And Rabbi Shimon says, no sin al smolo v'yotzi. No, we can even put it on his left hand, and that will be sufficient. His left big toe, his left thumb, and his left ear. And that will be sufficient. And as Rashi says, the last Rashi before the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer, lo boikra kidiksiv, that you don't need to enforce the Torah exactly as it's written. V'chein Rabbi Shimon, and similarly Rabbi Shimon. So those last two opinions show that Rabbi agree with Shimon, agree with Shmuel, and show that in fact you don't need to. They disagree with Shmuel. Shmuel is like the Tanakama, who says you need to enforce the Torah as it's written. But we see that there are also opinions, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon, who disagree and say, no, the Torah doesn't need to be enforced exactly as written. All right. It is now 8:37. I love this Rashi. And so if you want, you definitely all are welcome to go. But let's go back and do this Rashi with the story of the tax collector, of Abaya the tax collector. So let's turn back to Memdalad Amabet, and we'll go through it. We'll go through it again pretty quickly because I've shared the story outside, but it was just so much fun to read inside that in this way, I don't know that this is the longest Rashi in Shas, but if it isn't, it's certainly one of the longest Rashis. So Dubai Mechasa. So again, the Abaya the tax collector. So Maisa b'mochas echad. There was a story with a tax collector, Yisrael, a Jewish tax collector, Russia, and he was evil. Echad Shemes, and so there's one Jewish tax collector, and he died. Ubo bayom meis adam gadol be'ir. And a great person in the city also died on that same day. Ubo kol b'nei ha'ir v'nis asku b'mitaso ukrovei oso mochas hotzio gam es matas hamochas acharav. And so all the people in the city were dealing with the great person, and the relatives of the mochas also took his body with them. V'kavtzu aleim oivim, and then enemies came upon them. V'henichu hamatos. Ubarchu, and they left the caskets and they ran away. V'hayasham talmid achad sheyeshiv lo im matas rabo. But there was one student who stayed with his teacher's casket. La'achar after some time, chazru gedolei ha'ir, the city elders came back to likvor es hachacham v'nischalfe lahem mitaso b'shal mochas, and they switched up the corpses. V'haya oto talmud soek, and the student was yelling v'lo hoil, and it didn't help. The krove hamochas kavru esachacham v'nitztar ba oso talmud ma'od, and so the tax collector's relatives ended up burying the great man, and this really bothered the student. What sin must this man have done that he was buried in such an embarrassing manner? Okay, so period. And what great thing did the Russia do to be buried in with such great honor? So Niralo Rabbo B'chalom. So his Rebbe came to him in a dream. V'amarlo al titzdayer ba ve'erecha b'chvodi b'gan Eden b'kavod gadol uba ve'erecha oto ha'ish b'gehenem b'tzir shel pesach gehenem sove be'oznav. Come and I'll show you that I'm in the right place. I'm in heaven in Gan Eden, and I'm getting great honor, etc. And he's in the pits of the Gehenim are open and surround him. Aval pam achas. But what happened? One time, shamati begenus talmidei chachamim. I heard people talking bad about the talmidei chachamim. V'lo machisi, and I didn't object. And that's why I'm being punished. And this guy, the tax collector, he once prepared a beautiful party for the prince of the city. And the prince of the city didn't come. And he gave all of the food to the poor people. And this nice funeral was his reward. Amar Oto Talmud ad matayehe Oto Haish nadun bedin kasher. How long will it be for him to be subject to this harsh judgment? Amar lo ad sheyamos Shimon ben Shetach, until Shimon ben Shetach dies, v'yikanes tachtav, and he replaces him. Amar lo lama amar lo mipnei lama. Why is that the case? Why is Shimon ben Shetach going to be treated like that? Amar lo mipnei nosha mikshafinios Yisraeliot. Because of the Jewish witches that are in Ashkelon, and he doesn't do anything about it. He enforces no judgment against them. So the next day, the student goes and he tells Shimon ben Shetach, Ma'asa, kiname, what have you done? You need to object to them. Shimonim Kines Shmonim Bechorim Bale Koma. So he took 10 tall young men, V'haya Oto Hayom Yom B'Shamim, and that was a rainy day. V'natan Kad Gedola Biyad Kol Echad, and he gave each of them a big pot. V'echad Kol Echad V'echad V'kipel Talit B'tocham, and he had them put a cloak inside the pot. V'amar Lahen, he's Haru Behen, be careful. Shehein Shmonim Ubisha Shetichnesu Yigaveha Ish achas mehen min haaretz. That there are 80 of them, and when you enter, you need to lift them up. V'shuv ein mekashafot sholtos bachem. And once you do so, then their magic won't work on you because they're not touching the ground. V'im lav lo nuchal lahem halach. V'im lav lo nuchal lahem. And if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to be successful over them. So halach lo Shimon ben Shetach l'traklin shalahen. So he went into their palace, v'haniach habachurim, or their hall, v'haniach habachurim mibachutz, and all the students, all the young men were staying outside. Amrulo, they said to him, Miata, who are you? Amar lahem, Mekashifani, I'm a wizard. V'lunisoschem, and I came b'kashafim, and I came to help you with your magic. Basi. That's why I came. Amrulo, they said to him, Umakashafim biyadecha. What kind of magic do you have in your hand? Amar lahen, Yacholni lahavi lachem shmonim bechorim atufei tulesos neguvos. I can bring to you today 80 men that are wearing dry talis, v'aval pishahu yom geshamim, even though it's a rainy day. Amrulo, hanira, show us that. Yatza lachutz, the remez lahem, and so he did the hint to them. Hotzio atalisos min hakadim. They all took their talis out of their pots. V'nis atfu behen, and they put them on. V'nichnasu, and they entered. V'achas kol echad es achas mehen, and each of the men took one of the women. V'higibia, and they lifted her up. V'yachlu lahem. And they were being able to be successful. V'hotziyum, and they took them out. V'tilaum, and they hung them. Kulam, all of them. V'niskanu kruveihem the davar. But the relatives were very jealous about this. Ubo shnayim mehen, and two of them came, the kavnu divrayim, and they set aside, they arranged their words. V'heidu al beno shel Shimon ben Shetach, and they testified against the son of Shimon ben Shetach, Chiyav Misa, that he would be chayav to the death penalty. V'nigmar dino, and the sentence got enforced. I mean, the sentence got announced. And the quick case was completed. The kashahaya yotze liska, and when the son was taken out, Amar, he said, Im yesh bi avon zeh lo tehei mitasi kaparali. If I actually did this sin, then I don't want any kind of kapara. Vim eino kain tehei mitasi kapara al avonosai the kol and if not, then I want this this death penalty to forgive all of my sins. The kolar talui b'tzoar edim, and so as a result, a bad reputation came on the witnesses. The shamu elu, and they heard what they were saying. The chazbru behen, and as a result, they retracted. The nasnu tam l'divreihem, and they explained, this is why we did it. Machmas sinas hanashim, because of the anger of the regarding the women. The afal pikein lo niftar, and nonetheless they killed the son of Shimon ben Shetach. So that is the story. We got a chance to see it inside as well. I know that was a little bit long, but it was just such an awesome story that I had to share. And looking forward to continuing our learning together. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Next week, I think I'm able to do the entire next week in person, but we'll double check. Stay tuned. But I'm covering for Dove again next week as well. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos. And again, if you haven't had a chance to see the book, that is the book called The Rabbis and the 29 Witches by Marilyn Hirsch, you should take a look. I think it's available online. Definitely worth getting for grandkids. In that regard, I wish Mazel Tov to Moshe on the new grandson, and should just grow l'torah chuppah masim tovim. Wish everyone a Shabbat.
Thank you, and good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos. Bye bye.
So check out the chat. I posted a link to a famous case of hanging a dead body after execution.
All right, you got it. Thank you so much.
It's Mussolini and his fellow fascists.
Wow. All right. Not necessarily.
You just clicked on it. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Be well. Bye bye, everybody.